naturally I have to thank Bridget Jones for the Cumberland region and for this summit. Truly, as I travel the country, there aren't a lot of people doing what you're doing, so you certainly should give yourselves a pat on the back. I support the 6 principles you're pursuing, and so for that, I'm very excited to present to you here today. Before I get started, I usually talk a lot about demographics. I won't do that during this presentation, but just to let you know that I do a lot of traveling overseas. I've done about 150 trips around the world over the past 4 years, and so I'm looking forward actually to a 10-day break after this conference. But I was talking about my background. I'm a child of mixed race, which I'll talk about in a second. But I was in Australia, and I had to speak almost the minute I land. And I was so tired, instead of calling myself mixed race, I told the audience I was mixed use. And I said, you know, that's only something a planner would say. So I am here before you, both mixed race and mixed use. What I usually say is that I am a child of mixed race. I had a very interesting upbringing. My father, his family, clearly white and German and Jewish, they migrated here back in the early part of the 20th century. My mother, black, Catholic, and her family migrated here from Haiti. So if you put a German Jew and a Haitian Catholic, what you get is a mixed race, born-again Christian who gets along with himself totally well. There is no inner turmoil whatsoever. The Old Testament side gets along with the New Testament side. Diversity works, mixed use works. But the last point I want to make is that growing up, it was very confusing because they made fun of us. You know, zebra, half-breed, all these funny names, other. And it wasn't until the 1990s when finally, when the Halle Berrys hit the scene, they came up with a new term for mixed race, and it's called exotic. So I am the exotic past president of the American Planning Association. All right, so let me get into this presentation. And I always like to talk about why we plan and why we're doing the work that you're doing. And it's because planning is responding to growth and change. And if you look back at our country, we've been changing and we're growing. And there are some places that plan and some places that don't. I believe those places that plan are better off than those that don't. Back in the 19th century, U.S. population was just 5 million people, urbanized population 6%. 20th century, because of immigration, primarily from Europe, our population swelled to 76 million. And you can go on and on to see where we're headed, and by the 22nd century, our country will be over 500 million people. And I always like to point out that a person born today can live to see the 22nd century. So we're now resetting the way we think about the future. In fact, 1 in 3 people that are born today will live over 100 because life expectancy is increasing. So we have to think very differently about the future, and it's something I wanted to certainly point out. So as we look at the next 50 years, our country is going to grow by 124 million people. More than half of them are going to move here to the South. And so when we have conversations and people are saying, I don't want to grow, you might as well say you don't want it to rain. We're going to grow. And the question is, how are we going to handle that growth? We will have to, in this country, accommodate another 50 million housing units across our country. And that includes billions of square feet of commercial and all the other things we need to support the growth. So my question is, what will those communities look like going forward? Like the 1950s, 1970s? 1990s or something very different. And so we're spending a lot of time, both APA over the past year, and we launched this initiative about the next 50 years. How are we going to plan? What conversations are we going to have? Because demographics are changing a very different future than what we have here today. And my question is, what will Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, and this region look like? Certainly demographics are warranting a rethink about how we plan for the future. And so clearly this region, as you look at that growth, will get more than 50% of the growth of your state just in this region over the next 30 years. And you can see just the projections. How are you going to handle this growth? What's going to be different? How are people's behaviors going to change? And that's some of what I'm going to share with you here today. First, I like to talk about planning, because a lot of places where I travel, sometimes planning is heralded as something that's of value. In other places, it's not. There's a big difference between planning and zoning, but for the time being, we're going to talk about planning. Number one, Our goal is to protect the public interest, the public health, safety, and welfare, and that's very unique to our profession, because I challenge people that if we do not protect the public interest, my question to you is, who will? Planning is about place, but it's also about people. And throughout this presentation, you're going to see how focusing on people is going to change the way we plan. As planners, we have to understand emerging trends and issues and address uncertainty about the future. In fact, what I like to tell people is that planners and all of us in the room need to understand trends like a stockbroker watches the market. What is happening in your region? What do you need to prepare for? What conversations do you need to have with your public? That's something that's vitally important. We should also have a special concern for the long-term consequences of present actions. Very often we want to do something and we don't think about the consequences. It's our obligation or ethical responsibility to talk about those consequences. But what I see more tragic than this is the consequences of taking no action. No is an action, and many places want to bury their head in the sand, I don't believe you, and take no action. Guess what? There are consequences for saying no. There are consequences for taking no action. In fact, in our community, we try to tell our residents, when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. Well, what are you saying yes to? In our market, to say no to rental housing and multifamily, which is popular, and no to density, you're saying yes, seniors and young people, we don't want you in our community. Is that what you're saying? And so we have to have that conversation because we're headed toward a very near future and things are changing. So as I travel the country and the world and talk about the emerging trends, this is my list. Again, it's not exclusive. There are a lot of other issues that aren't on this list, but these are going to change not just our country, your state, but the world. These are different. We have not faced some of these issues before. They're brand new. They're brand new, so you cannot Google to find the answers to some of these problems. It's going to take new thinking and innovation, and some of these are game changers on how you approach these problems. The graying of America, or what I like to call the silver tsunami, and they did not name it after me, is affecting almost every community. And let me tell you, that's probably the biggest game changer you're going to face. You'll see in a second. So I'll go through some of these, not all of these, but I'm asking all of you in your region, in your state, in your city, in your town, look at those emerging trends to see how you're going to deal with it, because future generations are going to say, you knew. What did you do about it, and why didn't you do something? Your grandchild, your children will ask you, you knew about these issues, what did you do? So here are some of the major ones. We're getting older. Life expectancy is longer. By 2050. Basically 82.6 years will be the normal life expectancy. We'll have 20 million Americans over that age by that time. More people with disabilities, 1 in 5 today, Americans have disabilities. More multi-generational households, more single mothers. By 2030, majority of households will be single. I'll go into these in more detail. So here it is. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. This has never happened before. No one's really prepared for this or what it means. AARP is now teaming up with APA to figure out how do we start planning for livable communities. But this is going to be a game changer for many, many places, because the implications in terms of real estate tax collection and services and mobility are enormous. There's a phrase I told you about life expectancy, but let's look at the bottom one. By 2025, the predominant household in America for the first time will be one person. One. Not a family, one person. And that will continue for a generation, and we'll talk about the implications in a second. So just to see what's going to happen nationally between 1960 and 2025, look at the dramatic change in our household type. Back in 1960, it was about 50%, and by 2025, 28%. And there are a lot of reasons why this is happening, but this is what we're planning for. It'll vary in Tennessee, but basically you have to watch to see what will happen because it has implications. And we look at what's happening for the rise in unwed children. Back in 1960, 5 out of 100 children born out of wedlock. By 2009, it leaped up to 4 out of 10. And it's not just blacks, it's Hispanics and whites across the board. In fact, more than half of the mothers today under 30 are single. Services change, schools will change. How we plan for communities change. Who comes to public meetings will change. This is a generation of part-time fathers and no fathers that we will have to plan for going forward. And as I travel around the college campuses and I look across the room and see a young man talking to a young lady throughout my entire presentation, I say, young lady, he's not serious. How do I know? This chart tells me so. For whatever reason, that sweet spot where people got married between 25 and 34 went from 80% back in the 1960s down to 50%. Don't know why. So when people said, don't worry about the suburbs and single-family homes, they'll get married and have children. Oh, really? Only half of them are getting married, and when they decide to have a child, the woman says, that's okay. I'll raise the child on my own. Don't know why, but you'll see this is happening in your state. We're also seeing this phenomenon called natural decrease. 25% of all counties in the U.S. are shrinking. The common denominator is older whites who can no longer have children for a variety of reasons, and their children saying, I'm not staying here. I don't like the place. I don't like the job prospects. I'm going to Austin or Raleigh or Dallas or somewhere else. I'm not staying. Good news for you, you're not as bad as most states. If you're beige, those are the shrinking counties. You have a couple in the western part of your state. You can see the dark blue means that you're growing in the central part of the state, so there's good news. But as I travel, there's some states that'll shock you, and I'll show you one of them. This is Kansas. Do you think the policies in that state are pro-metropolitan? They're not. And they're just losing young people at massive levels. In fact, there's a border war between Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. Why? It's the only metro they have in town of their hope for the future. You do not want to be like this, Tennessee. And the good news, with the plan that you have, with those 6 principles, you're not headed in that direction. Implications, what are we going to do in an auto-dependent society when people realize they can no longer drive? And that's the biggest wake-up call. Right now, the estimate is 600,000 people over 70 stop driving every year. People can drive to their 80s and 90s, no problem. But that is the average number. A little story, my father drove till his late 80s. We're in a parking lot in Florida. After he hit a couple of cars, I said, Dad, we have to talk, it's time. And so if you ever travel to St. Cloud, Florida, and your car was hit in a parking lot, on behalf of my father, I do apologize. But look at Atlanta. They lead the nation in people over the age of 65 with no poor transit access. They're 2 years away from hitting that number. And guess what? You can't solve that problem in 2 years. That is a product is build, build, build. Don't you tell me what to do. I'm Marietta, I'm Decatur, I'm Fulton. Don't tell me what to do. Let the market determine. My question is, when I go down there, where's the market now? And so now they're in a conversation about what to do to solve this problem, put out a bond called T-Splot. Personally, don't ever name a project that sounds like you're spitting on a wall, but T-Splot, it failed. And now they're trying to rethink what they can do. Because now they're leading the nation in life cycle planning and housing, but still is something that you do not want to get into that condition. Well, here's the news for you. Kansas City's #1, but Nashville, you're along with us. The Raleigh-Durham Metro is that in mid-sized metros, you're in the top 5. So this is a warning, at least in this market. This is something you definitely have to pay attention to. Other implications, seniors and younger generation are looking for different lifestyle choices. Homes will get smaller, a preference to rent rather than to own. So we have to rethink rental. How many people ever rented in your life? Just so I can see. All right, oh my, are you bad people? Should I run and watch my pocket? We have to rethink rentals because it's changing. It's not as bad as we think. And this is a trend for a variety of reasons. But the real scary one is that the experts estimate by 2030, there'll be 25 million single-family homes on the market with nobody to buy them because the buyer, a single person, we're not sure they're willing to buy a 4,000 square foot home 10 to 15 miles from the city center. This will change regionally, and please don't check your phones to say, honey, it's time to sell. Calm down, you have till the 2020s. But this is something I think that will vary from region to region. I think Florida, out west, need to watch. So there are some innovations aging in place, a lot of things that are taking place to make sure you have your seniors in mind and that you want to take that uncertainty about the future. I also believe we need to plan for the market. There are different generations, and we have to understand that when you do your outreach, each one of these generations thinks differently about place. They all do. And the reason why I highlight the X, Y, and Z is because this 21st century is their generation. It's their century. We had our turn for most of us in the 20th century. It's now their turn to define this century, because the values and needs and aspirations are different for each one of those groups. They're different. I don't have time to get each and every one of them. I have done that in the past, and I'm sure I'll get information to Rick Bernhardt to share. But it drives consumer preferences and market demand. The greatest generation, my father's generation, understood true sacrifice. They gave their today for our tomorrow. There's never been a generation like that. Silent, mature generation, that was the explosion of suburbia, the highway, the suburbs, traditional homes. Things were very different. Baby boomers, the coolest generation on the face of the planet. Because they were hipsters, I'm now calling them boomsters. Then we have Gen X, the bus generation. They don't have many brothers and sisters, so as a result of playing with their imaginary friends, Richard Florida calls them the cutting edge of the creative class. Then we have Gen Y. Oh, Lord. You know them because they all want to be director, CEO after 1 year on the job. That's all it takes. And then Gen Z. The thing about the boomers, though, my father gave his today for our tomorrow. Boomers, unfortunately, because of the way they borrowed to buy, are now giving the young people's tomorrow for our today, and that's the national conversation that we're having. So we have to think about, this is their century, and we have to be mindful of it. And so as I look at a breakdown of the XYZ factor, in Raleigh, we're a young city, 70% of our population is basically 46 and under. In Nashville, it's 65. In Memphis, it's 65 roughly. So my question to you, and look at the state, and that means that those who are in leadership, that 30 to 35% who are making decisions for this century, can that generation give their today for the next generation's tomorrow? And sadly, as I travel the country, the answer is no. We have been brought up to think of place as a certain way, and therefore we want to plan that way for the future. I want you to think carefully about that as you go forward, because the Y generation, the millennials, place matters, not job. They actually will move to a city without having a job. Who does that? But they're doing it. They're doing it. They're changing the way we think about place. And so we're working very hard on how we do outreach, because the older generations love public meetings. Young generations, as my good friend Robin, I took a lot of slides out because I know what she'll probably cover. They don't like meetings, they don't do meetings, and so we're changing the way we engage them, because this is their century. We're leaving this to them. We have to engage them. As we move toward a new trend in our country, toward mega regions, because that's where a 21st century economy is going to be. This is from ULI. They're naming the major regional markets, and you want to be on this list, and guess what? Nashville, you're on this list. We're on the list as well. I love the Combat Kid list. These are cities that hit rock bottom, and they're on the rise. So this region is really on the list, and I encourage you to make sure you don't just sit on your laurels. You keep getting better and better and better, which I think you will. And so as we look at the tale of 2 centuries, the 20th century challenge was urbanization, people moving from the country to the city, but those Rust Belt cities are now shrinking. And now the growth and challenge in the 21st century, suburbanization, is lower density and spreading out, and all the growth is in the Sun Belt cities. I want Nashville and Raleigh and parts of Tennessee to lead the nation on how to do it right, because the growth is coming, 50% of it over the next 50 years. Give you some examples of what's happening in the Research Triangle. We were dealing with similar growth issues. We have a 15-county region that we plan for. We're expected to grow by 1.2 million and adding 700,000 jobs over 20 years, and we had to figure out what we're going to do. The problem is, over the last 50 years, our population grew by 480%, but we consumed 3.5 times the land. That is not sustainable going forward. In fact, our nickname, I don't know if you know, for Raleigh, our nickname was Sprawley. Did you know that? Don't repeat that. To keep that to yourself. So this is what it looked like. There's Durham and Raleigh. They're 2 different places. People call us Raleigh-Durham, 2 different places. Research Triangle Park in the middle, that's 1950s. Then here comes Research Triangle Park and IBM. You see our urbanized area starting to spread. That was now to 2000, and we said if we kept this pattern, where would we be in 2035? And that was it. Peanut butter spread throughout the whole region. We said we don't want this future. We had to change. And so we decided to work with ULI. We had a reality check. For us, planning is our competitive advantage, and we want to make sure we stay competitive in a global economy for jobs, skilled, and knowledge workers, and we wanted to plan together as a region. We focused on what connected us, because regional planning is always hard. And here are some of the issues that we came up with where we can agree that didn't deal with local issues and we all could sign on. And so we went through this exercise, 30 tables, came up with a scenario to figure out how we would grow. You have forced choices. This one won, Vibrant Centers. I was on one of the team. I'm proud to say my team, Vibrant Centers, was the anonymously one picked as the winner. I was sweating because as plane director, I had to show them I know what I'm doing. So I kept my job. And then we all came up with 3 principal statements we would pursue the entire region: quality growth, vibrant centers, and green space. And so there was a call to action. We now got 50 municipalities to sign on, and we're working together on how we plan together as a region. Follow-up actions, we have a regional transit plan. We have 2 of the 3 counties that actually passed the half-cent sales tax. My county is the last holdout. Once we get it, we'll move forward. Doing a regional land use plan for the first time to see how all these different plans fit together, because very often they're done in isolation. And we're working very hard on a regional economy because we know to be competitive, we have to work together. If Durham gets a big project, we cheer for Durham. We cheer for the next region because we know we work together. We don't have this inner competitive fighting for jobs. We work together, and it's bad for us to take a job from one region or one part of our counties into another, something we just discourage. And so here's just what we're trying to communicate to the public, our transit plan, and then here are all the land use plans we're trying to put together. So for us, having a successful regional profile is access to knowledge and skilled workers. Very vital. Cost of living index and a great place to work and live, and I believe you excel at that as well. But we have to grow together as a region. You rise as a region and you fall as a region. If you do not support a strong Memphis or a strong Nashville, the region suffers. The region suffers, so we have to make sure that it all works. And we are trying to make sure we have an urban, suburban, and rural strategy. Far too often in this country, it's urban against rural. We're trying to figure out how we can make the economies work. The rural areas, whether it's tourism or renewables or local food economy, we've got to figure out how it works, and that's part of what we do in our region as well, because we rise and fall as a region, and that even includes our rural areas as well. Why? Because in our state, 15 of our metros constitute 70% of the state's population, 75% of the jobs, and 83% of the GDP. That's how powerful it is, and we have to make sure we lift up all parts of our region together. We also focus on research and a partnership between government, business, and the universities. The reason why the RTP story came about, if you didn't know it, young people were leaving our state. They were leaving. We couldn't keep them. So they came up with this idea of how to become a national, international research park. It was successful, and as a result, it now has spun off these incredible research universities that actually have over $1 billion of research. And the young people is a brain magnet. They're coming from all over the country because of the entrepreneurship and innovation. And if you have those research universities, I tell you to leverage them. Just to show you the power of having that in your region, this is an example of the startups in our region, of young people coming to us because there's innovation and entrepreneurial-minded people. In 2011, these are folks who filed for businesses. In Orange County, which is where Chapel Hill is, 950. In Durham County, 1,400. And in Wake County, 16,000. New jobs, not taking them from other places, new businesses starting up because of the energy that is in that region from those research universities. And now, while they're being spread out, we're now the leading place for serious gaming in the United States. We actually eclipsed, sorry Robin, Austin, Texas. We're now #1. And so we're trying to explain that downtowns and main streets, is what I call it, are becoming the new golf course where deals get done. Because innovators, knowledge workers, and entrepreneurs are looking for that third place where outside deals are come together. People laughing about, I don't play golf. Is that true? I don't know. I saw a couple of people laughing to the side. I've never played golf except on my PlayStation, but don't tell anybody that either. They come together with ideas in these third places. And so place matters. In fact, what is happening is as we look at our plan for downtown, we're about to launch a new one. We now have Citrix, 600 jobs paying over $75,000. When you come to our airport, that's the sign that you see. Welcome to the Triangle region. By the way, we're hiring, and we're downtown. And that is something that RTP is something they're concerned about. So as we look at go to the last phase of my presentation here, what I call ROI. I love this phrase by the mayor of Chattanooga. I know Karen Hunt is here from the local chapter of APA. And he said if you aren't a city where people want to live, well, you could just swap it out for place. You aren't a place where people want to invest. Place matters. And I like to focus on the plan making versus the deal making. To me, the two should not be mutually exclusive. They can work together. Far too often I see deal making rather than plan making. And when you look at a property, is it a commodity or are you building a community? Because a commodity piece of property you buy and sell, we want to build a community that lasts for generation. And finally, schools equals economic development. You've got to ace that part if you want to attract jobs and be a strong region. So we kept hearing, you invest in downtown, we're tired of downtown, and so I came up with this illustration that I had to show them why that was not a good thing to say. Basically, if you would take 600 single-family homes on 150 acres, it would equal the tax value of one of our high-rises downtown on 1 acre of land. That's it. You could take 150 acres on 1 acre to generate the same tax value. And what I told the residents, if you do not support downtown development or Main Street development or compact development, what you're really saying is, as a homeowner, raise my taxes. In fact, that building has 90 times the tax value on a per acre basis. A colleague of mine, Joe Minicosi, came up with this work, and he said if you compare a downtown product on a 3-acre site, it could pay off its infrastructure in 3 years, ROI 35%. But a suburban product on a 30-acre site would take 42 years, giving taking our today in exchange for your tomorrow on a return on investment of 2%. And most places choose the bottom, even though the top makes better sense. And if you compare a product, because Walmart, jobs, we're excited, it's jobs, but let's take a look at it if you look at a per acre basis. That Walmart on 34 acres, forget the high rise, let's just go 5 stories. That downtown product on a half acre, taxes from the Walmart, $6,500, downtown product, 10 times the amount. What about the jobs? On a per acre basis, Walmart 6, downtown product 74. We don't share this with our elected leaders. We don't have this conversation. And the formula does work differently in smaller markets or smaller jurisdictions, but it's something we need to talk about. So in Raleigh, we tried to see what it looked like. The highest value is the blue. I couldn't see it. So I asked my staff, put it in the 3 dimensions, and can somebody tell me where downtown is? It is now paying a huge burden of the tax base of our city. And then you also see Midtown. So we're changing the entire way we think, and those in the regions are now looking at this to do the very same thing. We want to be smarter and more efficient about how we plan. And so if you look at, in Raleigh, our per acre, the lowest on the list is actually a Walmart. And the highest for us is a 6-story mixed-use building in our central core. And so we're changing the way we think because we want to be good stewards and smarter about the land asset we have in our city and in our county. And so everything you see in pink is what we're about to rezone to increase in value, which will help our market and stimulate even more development within our city, keeping the neighborhood safe and preserved. So it's a win-win for everyone. And I was shocked by this. I asked my council, they read it, but we came up with a policy called a ROI in our comprehensive plan that all projects for capital improvements must be subjected to a ROI analysis. So it not just widen the thoroughfare, what's the rate of return? How are you paying for this? And so this also has been a change in our community. And so just downtown, Liberal Street, which was controversial, $25 million, has now translated to $3 billion in investment in 6 years. And so now we're now having a whole conversation, taking this nationally, myself and others, about looking at ROI as a way for growth, to be smarter and better about how we plan. And as a result, we're one of the lowest tax places in North Carolina. Great quality of life, jobs, good schools, all of it for low cost. That, to me, is a wave of the future. And as you grow as a region, that's what you have to look out for. We're not just us, Champaign, Illinois, Salt Lake City, Other markets, Cleveland, are looking at how this ROI is making a lot more sense, and it's something I encourage you to do as well. I know Rick had an organization here that just released a report, so certainly I'm hoping that you will embrace this and think differently how you plan regionally, looking at ROI as one of those important things. So as I close, Foundation for Change. Regional planning is not a process but a campaign. Please keep that in mind. It's something that's quite different. Continue the outstanding work that you all started. I'm very impressed by what you're doing. Develop an outreach and an in-reach strategy. Very often, departments can be the problem, other local governments can be the problem, and I have a saying, fragmented government produces fragmented results. So you have an outreach strategy to the residents, but you need an in-reach strategy to all of the fellow local governments and departments so that you all are on the same page. And communicate the problems that you're solving. So as I close, a metro regional economy is a 21st century economy. Understand the implications of the long-term consequences of present actions, but also the consequences of taking no action.